This is video number 3 in the week 12 lecture series looking at management of organisms, or biota, within Ontario. This particular video is going to focus on biodiversity, and as part of this video I'm going to have a little fun and put out a challenge. So watch the entire video and look for your challenge as you're watching. As I said, the video is going to focus on biodiversity specifically in this province, in Ontario. And when we talk about diversity, we can be defining it as looking at the complexity within our environment. The issue within Ontario, while we have always done environmental assessment by looking at components of biodiversity, we really started to see development of a strategy looking specifically at biodiversity in the early 2000s. The image that you're seeing here is a report that came from the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and remember that role has now been rolled into the Auditor General of Ontario's roles and responsibilities. At the time, the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario was really trying to highlight some of the impacts on Ontario's species who were most at risk. And so the image that you're seeing is a bit of a graphic on the different issues that were impacting those particular species. As that conversation started to develop, more and more we started talking about this term biodiversity and how we can be using management of biodiversity to help support our species at risk. So the image you're now seeing is also coming from the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. This one was released in 2008, and it's looking at when we talk about species who are declining within the province, that we classify them into different levels of threats. So that's the colors that you're seeing on the slide. That some may be, of special concern, so not a huge impact at this time, but something we should be monitoring, all the way up to endangered and extinct. And when we are looking at those numbers, I think one of the things that this particular graphic shows is that it's hitting all different types of organisms within the province. So we're not just focused on plants and mammals, that it's impacting fish and insects and mollusks and lichens and all of those different components within our ecosystems. So why be concerned about biodiversity, and why is it important to the management of our ecosystems? So as this discussion continued, the key component is that we are all connected. So when we see a change in one component of our ecosystems, other components of our environment are also impacted. We must think from a human perspective that we rely a lot on the services that our ecosystems provide. So think about the food that our ecosystems provide, that we access resources like water and wood products from our environment, that things like medicines require different natural components in order to generate those essential medicines, and that lots of our climate control, so heating and cooling and filtering of contaminants from air and water, are coming from the natural landscape, wetlands and trees and various vegetation. So as we have these discussions, we should really be thinking about the importance of biodiversity and putting a value on all of these services that our natural resources and natural environment is providing us. Because not only is there a health and an economic benefit to those services, but they provide us aesthetic value by being able to be by a waterfront and enjoy the view, or getting recreational opportunities as we walk through a trail. And so the discussion continued to evolve in Ontario that not only should we be trying to manage our ecosystems for health, but we should be incorporating this sense of biodiversity because everything is connected, and that to ensure that we are managing appropriately, we should be placing a value on those specific components, because hopefully that will tweak those who are creating some of the policy and some of the legislation, who are undertaking the activities that may have an impact, that we can show them the importance by placing that value. So that can be a cultural value, a personal value. It can be a value to be looking at the need for resources from a business. But in some cases, we are also actually putting a dollar value on these to show that if we don't have those services, we have to build some man-made infrastructure in order to support the services that we are losing within that environmental landscape. When we talk about biodiversity in Ontario, we have structured it in multiple ways. So we're speaking to three different components linked to biodiversity. So one is species, that as we're managing for an environment that has a rich biodiversity, we're looking at the different types of species within an area. We can be speaking to a genetic biodiversity, so looking that we have multiple different genetic differences among individuals within a species, because we know and understand that in order to have a healthy population, that genetic variety helps that population withstand disease and other hardships. And finally, we can be looking at ecosystem biodiversity. So within a particular region, we want to see a variety of different ecosystems because we understand the connection and interplay that those different ecosystems might have in supporting overall environmental health and in supporting some of the social and economic needs that we have, as well as habitat diversity requirements in order to address some of these other two components. Our strategy in Ontario has been built on a multi-stakeholder partnership. And so the slides that you're seeing here is giving a list of all of the different organizations that have come together in order to address biodiversity. And so as you look down the list, there are certainly some non-government organizations, environmental groups. So you can see Conservation Ontario, Ducks Unlimited, but you will also see a diversity of other types of businesses. So in here, look that they have the Royal Ontario Museum. They've got some educational institutions like Trent University. You should see that they have specific industries like Ontario's Stone, Sand and Gravel Association and Ontario Power Generation, that collectively we can be working together towards biodiversity protection. One note is that this is not legislated, that the approach that was taken in Ontario is not to develop new legislation or try and integrate it into existing legislation, that this can be done by those multiple stakeholders working together within their key areas of interest. So when you think about the non-government organizations, they may be doing some of the science or some of the sampling or some of the in-field, on-the-ground work, doing tree planting and habitat restoration. And we can be working alongside businesses who may have the land to allow us to do some of that planting, or may be looking at developing best practices to help support the ongoing implementation strategy. So this is the document that was created by that long list of stakeholders. So it was originally developed in 2011, and it had targets out until the end of this year, so 2020. So it was called Ontario's Biodiversity Strategy. And the idea behind the document that it was setting some long-term objectives and setting some desired outcomes that those collection of stakeholders could be working towards. Within the document, it then outlined specific key actions that had very specific targets that those stakeholders could be working towards. The document also set out very specific roles and responsibilities for different stakeholders based on their specific expertise. So this is a little bit of a different approach than we've been looking at. So far, we've been looking into the required components of policy, so legislation and regulations where we can actually enforce components. So very different approach in the sense that we were looking at creating a voluntary document, but something that multiple stakeholders could be working towards. And so I want you to understand that this is a strategy. So this is a non-enforceable, non-legal tool that the province of Ontario used. And a strategy provides the model for multiple stakeholders in order to create some consistent policy and look at how implementation can actually occur. So within this document, in order to protect biodiversity, that collective stakeholder group developed 4 strategic directions. So when you think about policy formation, and we remember at the beginning of the course, we talked about some of the reasons in order to create policy, or some of the things that from the ground up, we see creating that policy structure. It is linked back to strategic directions. And so as we were looking at the collective, or as the province was looking at the collective of stakeholder groups that was involved, they came up with 4 key things that they would be working towards. And those key things were, number 1, engaging the public, engaging different people, different expertise, reducing threats to biodiversity, and as the next one leading into that is enhancing overall resilience. So we can be working in 2 aspects. We can be looking at mitigation through the reduction of threats, but also adaptation to understand the current state and how we can continue to ensure a healthy environment by improving resilience within our ecosystems. And then the last one was to improve knowledge, and this really focused around data collection and monitoring to look at overall progress that we are making towards biodiversity protection. So one of the takeaways that I want you to think about when you think about how we are addressing biodiversity in Ontario is that as a result of this strategic document, there was a very structured process in how we achieved those outcomes. And so how you'll see the document organized is based on the 4 strategic directions. So you can see the cycle that they've included in this graphic, looking at improving knowledge, engaging people, reducing threats, and enhancing resilience. The structure under each of those strategic directions is then that they created some objectives, some desired outcomes, and some key actions in order to achieve those desired outcomes. So objectives are, what is the focus of the activities that fall under each of those strategic directions? Outcomes is, what is the end result that we're hoping to achieve, or what is anticipated? And finally, the key actions is what can be done to specifically achieve each of the outcomes that was laid out in the previous step. As part of the good policy development cycle, so think of that cyclical process we talked about in the first half of the course, there was targets created. And so the idea is that if we want to see if we are successful, we need to create those targets as part of the strategy. So we can be monitoring those outcomes and actions, and it gives us the ability to measure the progress that we have made within each of those components. In order to track progress, the Ontario Biodiversity Council was formed, including those collective stakeholder groups, different representatives from different types of sectors, and they have been tracking achievements that have come out of the biodiversity strategy. So I've included here the public-facing website where they have been doing that tracking. And the idea is that you, as the public and as a sector and expertise, have the ability to go into that document and look at, for any one of those 4 strategic directions, the targets that have been set. And as part of those targets, there was specific reporting timelines. So 2015 and 2020 tended to be some key benchmark periods. And looking at 5-year reporting timeframes for looking at the current state of Ontario's biodiversity. So what you're seeing on this slide is a bit of a summary snapshot of those 4 strategic directions, the targets that were created under there, and then you'll see the kind of progress meter that they've shown with the green charts to show how well we have doing. And there's some common language that they've included there about little progress versus substantial progress within each of those key targets. So you are able to access this report as well. So this is the 2015 report. We can anticipate next year, so in 2021, that we will see that 2020 report once we've had all of our data included, that we can finally do a final capture of, based on this particular strategic plan, how well we've done in addressing and enhancing biodiversity within the province. So the last component is looking at the indicators and being able to track some of the targets that we've tried to achieve. So here's your challenge. I want you to look at the timestamp that is happening right now, and so I'll get you to capture it now. If you send me an email to show that you have been through the lecture slides and include the video number, so we're in video number 3, and the timestamp that you just recorded, I'll give you an extra mark on this particular assignment. So the last component I also want you to go into, and you don't need to send me an email on this, but if you click on this web link, what it's going to take you to is the indicator site and looking at tracking the indicator. And so some of the things that I want you to notice is that there is some open transparency about progress here, that this is a live site that is updated as new information is available, that when you think about good policy development, that this really shows the connection between science and the process of making some adjustments in policy direction in order to ensure that we are meeting the overall objectives we originally intended. So you can have a look at that. Notice that the tabs have each of the strategic directions, and that as you click on indicators, so there's indicators as well as related indicators, you can actually explore progress that we have been making within each of those. And so I'll just show you quickly what that might look like. So if you click on that hyperlink, this is the website you should be coming to. So again, it's the Ontario Biodiversity Council that is maintaining this page. And if you click on any one of these tabs, it's going to take you to the list of indicator targets that we have been working on. So you can be exploring how well we've done within each of these categories. And if you click on any one of these indicators or the related indicators, it's going to take you to the analysis that has happened. So this is looking at changes in greenhouse gas emissions as one of the key, so we were looking within the threats. So greenhouse gas emissions are one of the threats to biodiversity, and looking since the 90s, how well we have been doing in achieving our overall targets. And so we haven't been doing too bad. You can see that the red dotted line is the 2014 targets we were working towards. And they've done a bit of a summary here to look at the overall trends, and it will provide you some additional background information on why this particular objective was incorporated and how they've done the analysis within that. So please spend some time and investigate that. The key thing as you look through these slides is to think back to the connection and the structure that was developed within the strategic document, that it created those 4 strategic directions. Within each of those directions, we created some objectives that focused activities, that we were working towards specific desired outcomes and identifying key activities to help us achieve those outcomes, and that we were using the targets in order to monitor how well we are doing at actually achieving those actions. And so a great way to measure overall progress. So thank you for joining the final video. If you have any questions as a result of the outcomes of these 3 videos or in completing the assignment, please make sure that you're filling in those questions as part of the discussion forums. Students can be working together to help support each other as you're answering those questions. And by all means, if you have a question outside of the discussion forum, you can always email me. So thanks, and hope everybody stays well.